There's my microphone. What's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome back to the stream. It's Tuesday. We're getting tactical today, and we're doing something a little bit different. So today, figured we would do a little tier list action because we are, here's a cat, we are just coming off of a new data slate. The meta is very different, and while we did have a ton of events today, things are going to look a little different, I think, after the changes in the data slate transpose themselves over to the competitive scene. So right now, we're watching sort of the dregs of a metagame that no longer exists. So what I'd like to do is take the opportunity to rampantly speculate and talk about what we may see be successful in the future. So first off, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Hope everyone got some games in over this past weekend, hung out for a bit, looked at the new Militarum stuff that's coming out. I know there's tons of spoilers about that. We talked a little bit about the Rogal Dorn in a short yesterday, and overall, it's an exciting time for Warhammer 40,000. By the way, as well, chat, by way of announcements as we are just getting started today, yesterday, we hit 40,000 subscribers on the channel, which is awesome because it's a Warhammer 40,000 channel, so that is the meme number, which is sweet. So we're going to do a giveaway. I've got a bunch of stuff to give away. I'm going to try to find, get some additional things to give away, and I know I'm excited about it. Inky's excited about it. Inky, what do you think about a giveaway for everybody? What would you like to win in a giveaway? How about some kill team? Nope, she's gone. Well, fair enough. So yeah, that's super exciting. So that's what we're going to be doing. We'll probably have a video detailing how that will work out later this week. But thanks for everyone who has subscribed to the channel. Thanks for everyone who's hanging out with me and who has stayed with it as we've gone through the journey. It was my goal this year to hit 40,000 subscribers because I thought that would be cool by the end of the year, and we've hit it by October, so we were even earlier than expected, so that's good. Yeah, super exciting, good stuff. So let's talk about some friggin' tier list, everybody. Actually, before we do that, I do have some people to shout out. I am going to talk about some lists for one moment, because we do have some community members who did super well this weekend, and I do want to give them some shout outs. So over in the Discord, if you're in the Discord, !Discord in the chat, by the way, or you can find the link down in the description very often, then if these lists would load, I could look at them. You'd probably recognize some of these people, and if you watch my live streams very often, you'd also be able to recognize them. So we're on our DGI here. Here we go, we did it. The first one's really easy. Breaking Heads, the Breaking Heads Cup. So a big shout out to Fred Oho over there at Breaking Heads. But Malchahoff, a.k.a. Wolf on Mibu, 5-0 at a GT over the weekend. Amazing. He did play Emperor's Children. Not quite as exciting, but, it is what it is. We have a couple of cool results this weekend. Obviously, Ben Urich with Orks going 6-0 at SoCal Open. We have... let's see. Also, Ash C, Kiantam, or Kiania, over from Twitch, 5-0 with Valorous Heart, Adepta Sororitas. I literally just streamed her list last weekend. Huge congratulations to her as well. And speaking of SoCal Open, let's jump back up there. Matthew Green, a.k.a. Headstrong, 6-0 with Tyranids over at SoCal Open. So a bunch of Tactical Tortoise people doing really well in tournaments this weekend. So I just want to give a quick shout out to all those folks because that is super sick. Big congratulations to all those people. Now, let's talk about this frickin' tier list, chat. So a couple things. I have what I believe is all the factions here. I have 21 factions. Is this all? This is all of them, right? I hope that's enough. Hopefully we don't miss anybody and we have to do it again. I have amalgamated a couple of them. This is going to be a controversial take, chat, but I've put my foot down this data slate, this tier list this time around, and I've just made every Space Marine into this little chibi man right here. So every Space Marine is just this guy now. I literally went through and averaged out all of the win rates for every different Space Marine subfaction that was being recorded independently, and I got what is basically, I basically just got what GW had for their numbers, to be fair. But I sort of used that to inform where I would put all the Space Marines, because it ends up being, you know, they have the same range of win rates as other factions do. They just tend to play their lower win rate factions or sub-factions a little bit more often. You know, generally speaking, a good Space Marine list is going to be around a 45%, but obviously they get dragged down by their other sub-factions, and I'm kind of tired of stepping around that minefield, so we're just going to call them all the same thing. So if anybody's wondering where their Salamanders went, or White Scars, or Blood Angels, or Space Wolves, all that stuff, it's just going to be Space Marines for now. I took a little bit of an analytical approach this time, as opposed to some of the other times I've done faction tier lists. I went through and I built in rates from the previous version of the rules, post or pre-Dataslate, and I built a list from that, and then went through and rearranged it based on the value that I saw of the buffs or nerfs that every faction got. And then I changed a couple things up because I tend to like to look at factions as a whole. So, in especially the case of Chaos factions, one thing that we haven't seen in over the last couple of weeks quite as much is allying in Demons. And that is obviously becoming more and more popular as time goes on, because as it turns out, Tzeentchian Flamers are really stupid. So I did sort of spike both of those factions up a little bit, because I think we would be seeing more of those, and the same for things like Thousand Suns. So yeah, that's the idea is that we're sort of incorporating allies into the rating of both factions. So it's kind of a holistic rating of the faction's meta impact, I guess, more than straight up their power level. Did Wolf on Mibu take Abaddon in the Breaking Ed's Cup? I closed the window, chat. But you can go look up his list. I don't know if he did. I know he was playing Decimators, but I don't know if he had Abaddon in his list, for sure. Frendolf getting lumped in with Dark Angels. I'm sorry, man. You're going to have to differentiate yourself more by getting your own codex. How's that? Or not. I don't know. Something. In which tier are Adeptus Tortoises? Unfortunately, those cannot be ranked because they'd be too high, obviously. So, yeah. Space Marine lumped together, but Incarns on their own? Yeah, so, I mean, so Ynnari is distinctly different than Space Marines, right? Because while Space Marine subfactions have unique units to some extent, Ynnari draws from 3 separate codexes. So, in my opinion, it's more dramatically distinct than 2 Space Marine chapters from another. Behareth is the entirety of the Craft World faction. If you don't believe that Behareth is like secretly in charge of every Craft World, then you should play against that guy. He's really he's really dumb. I think he's the most iconic unit from Craft Worlds. Also, Chaos Demons are being represented entirely by Tzeentch Flamers right now, which I think is also appropriate. So come at me. All right, let's get into this. It looks like this is starting it, and I have my notes sheet right here, which is going to be very bright. Let's make that smaller, so maybe it's a little bit less bright. I have a general ranking of all the factions, not necessarily power levels, but I will put them where I think they're going to be close to, and we'll go from there. So we're going down alphabetical order because I think that's just how Tiermaker sorted it. We have Adeptus Mechanicus. I have them. I think previously they would be right around the bottom of the game because they were doing very badly. And while I don't think that is entirely accurate as the power of the faction in the pre-data slate position, because a lot of people were playing there were a lot of really bad Adeptus Mechanicus builds going around. And I think the ones that were good, especially when they were played in formats in which they were strong, were really good, as evidenced by the fact that they won LVO last year. Obviously, there have been a lot of rules changes since then, and they've kind of dropped down and steadily, but I think they could still compete. That said, now that they have removed a bunch of buffs, I would solidly put them not in the bottom of the game. I'm certainly happy to be wrong here, but I don't foresee Adeptus Mechanicus suddenly springing back and like taking over the game, having lost the buffs, the nerfs that they did. If you ran back all of their erratas as well, like maybe we have something to talk about there. But as it stands, Mechanicus just got a lot of tools in their toolbox to give them a better chance into some tough matchups. But I don't think that the changes they got were like necessarily transformative to the faction as a whole. So they're going to have a little bit of a better opportunity to win in some situations. And I actually think against Tyranids, they are relatively scary because getting old school and rich rounds back is going to make them lethal against non-vehicle armies. And then the vehicle armies, they can also shoot with laser cannons. So that's all pretty good. Which means they may be sort of silver bullets to things like demons into Tyranids, which may put them up on the power ranking, but I think for the most part they're going to be in that area. We are starting kind of not super strong because we have Astra Militarum. I don't think it's worth talking about Astra Militarum too much. There are, at my opinion, they're going to be around the same level as Adeptus Mechanicus, although that is likely to change within the next couple of weeks, given that they have a new codex coming out and a lot of new units, hugely impactful new mechanics. They're shooting 16 more wounds out of Death Strike missile launchers. All that stuff is like super exciting, and so I mean, but we can put them sort of at the bottom right now, but that's clearly going to be changing pretty quickly. We need to add Megas Marines and get accused of being S tier. Yeah, that's a downward punch right there. You can't be doing that. Malgan Ra's the best Phoenix Lord. Man, I wish. Malgan Ra's model is so freaking cool, and he is so not very good. And that makes me sad, because they did a lot to, like... It sucks that the oldest and crappiest looking Phoenix Lord is the best one. You know, as much as Behareth is strong, god damn it, is he not that good looking? Jesus. Next up, we have Chaos Knights. Wow, man, we are starting very weak here. And Chaos Knights, this might be a hot take chat, but in my opinion, going into the newest iteration of the metagame, Chaos Knights are the single worst faction in Warhammer 40,000. I'm calling it now. Chaos Knights are not very good. Fortunately for us, that doesn't mean that they're sort of unplayably garbage, but the fact that they have kind of an inflexible game plan, and although they are brought up a little bit by the fact that they like bring Abaddon alongside, and can play like the dog walking, the dogs walking the park list, for the most part, they have a very bad win rate and did not really receive anything that would improve it. So on the whole, they're, I believe, just going to stay down at the bottom. On the flip side, we have Chaos Space Marines. Now, Chaos Space Marines are doing incredibly well. As was pointed out to me recently, though, that's mostly because that is they are right now. If you don't break down every Space Marine chapter into their component parts, they are right now the most populous army in the game, and that's pretty impressive. And I think it's only going to increase as people iterate on versions of Chaos Space Marines plus Chaos Demons. So I have Chaos Space Marines not somewhere around the top 10-ish. They still tend, I think, they are probably being drugged down by some sub-factions that are not quite as strong. But I think we're gonna for now put them in this good category right here, which will probably be like the top 8. And I think that is a solid place for them. With the understanding. I mean, their best builds are some of the best lists in the game. I think, especially like Emperor's Children, and at least for as long as it survives, Emperor's Children plus Tzeentch stuff from the Demons Codex is obviously very strong. And that could change in the not too distant future, but I also think that there are some other builds that also bring in Chaos Demons. Like we've seen creations of Bile plus Chaos Demons; those lists are pretty strong. While I don't think that they are the cutting edge, I think that they are going to continue to be extremely good, and especially those Emperor's Children lists continue to do extremely well. Next up, we have regular Craftworld Eldar. So Behareth leading the faction by himself. And unfortunately, regular old Craftworld Eldar not doing too hot right now. They're sort of aggressively mediocre, but I have them sort of kind of just above Adeptus Mechanicus right now. So I'm going to put them kind of at the bottom of this mid-tier, and I think that's a really good place for them. Craftworld Eldar without any friends, so we're not considering a Ynnari build, we're not considering Harlequins or Drukhari in with them, are I think are underperforming. And part of the fact, I think, was maybe an overcorrection of their codex in the last iteration of the data slate. I don't think the codex as a whole is bad, and I think that is evidenced by the fact that Ynnari is doing, I wouldn't say significantly better than Pure Craft Worlds, but better than Pure Craft Worlds. But I don't think that Pure Craft Worlds sort of by themselves are a particular powerhouse here. Do we not have Tyranids on this list, chat? Now that you're pointing it out, did it not upload? Every time I make a tier list, chat, this happens. Shit. Fuck. God damn it. Well, there's nothing to do about it now. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to add another picture in here, so we're just fucked. That's okay. We can talk about Tyranids at the end. Well, yeah, that sucks. Are they in my folder? Now I can't even find my folder that I used. Cool. Well, there it is. Whatever. Yeah, I don't have Tyranids and a little picture for Tyranids. That's too bad. We'll just talk about them at the end. That's fine. I think, Tyranids probably pretty evident where they're gonna end up. Adeptus Custodes are the next one. Yeah, it's just because they're low on the alphabet, chat. I went down alphabetically, and I think I just skipped them while I was doing like Tau and Thousand Suns. Oh yeah, you know what? You know this, chat. In my list of factions, they're the last one, and I just forgot to add them. All right, but we have Custodes next. Custodes I have very much in the middle of the road. So they're a little bit above these Craft World lists. I think other factions being brought up may drive them down a little bit, but like Custodes right now are kind of the definition of like the direct middle of the metagame. And I think, that's a fine place for them to be. I imagine feels worse playing them than they are in the then they end up performing statistically, because I think that Custodes have a really wide range of matchups, and they perform dramatically differently in different matchups, where they kind of stat check your opponent. Depending on the variety of Custodes you're building, you can build shooting Custodes or spamming infantry or spamming dreadnoughts. All of those are pretty effective, but they're all effective in different situations. And I think the real problem with the faction right now is that you're kind of like riverboat gambling on what matchups you hit. And then, it doesn't make the faction necessarily bad, but it does make them kind of suck to play in a competitive environment. And that I can understand. But I don't think that Custodes are bad by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that they're mediocre. And so that's why we're going to put them in this like sort of whatever category in the middle. I also should mention too, like there is the complaint from a lot of Custodes players, and that is it is fair that Custodes do have... they do have a model availability problem, I guess we'll call it, where their plastic models in the, from the codex itself are not very good. But for the most part, their range is supported by Forge World stuff. And that's unfortunate, but I don't think that really plays into, the actual power level of the faction. I think that the... Your Forge World options, in my opinion, are just part of your faction identity. And, as much as it sucks to buy those models and want to play with your plastic ones, it is what it is. That's what factions are in 40k. So you just kind of suck it up. Riverboat gambling is very dangerous. That's also dangerous for models too. If you want to riverboat gamble with Forge World resin models, the boat could rock and all your models fall off the table and they break, and that sucks for sure. Played against Custodes as guard and had no chance. All the shooting went to invul, and Las guns do nothing against the 2+ save in the entire army. I mean, you force enough 2+ saves and eventually they fail. But yeah, it doesn't feel that great, especially if you aren't, if your opponent's just like spiking them and you don't have the volume to kill them, and you're just like, poopy. Yeah. Next up we have Chaos Demons, and we may have another hot take here, chat. We'll see. I don't think that Chaos Demons are the best faction in the game, but I think that they are top 2, and I'm gonna put my foot down on that at least for the next couple weeks, maybe until the Tzeentch Flamers see a nerf. And that's not only because demons themselves have a really strong win rate, which they do, not like the best in the game ever, but they also bring up a lot of other factions. Hey, my cat's walking around on the table. Inky, get down. Down. Don't come over here. Get out of here. Come out. You come off the table. Come off the table. Off the table. Oh, come on. You're being a bitch. What are you doing? Come hang out with me. There you go. Wow. Say hello, cat. So I think, a lot of the power of demons is also how they ally into other factions. And so they are themselves extremely powerful as an independent faction, but they also mesh into most other chaos subfactions and sort of buoy up those win rates as well. So they're like greater than the sum of their parts, in my opinion. They have... had a dramatic impact on the fact that Chaos Space Marines are in the tier 2, in my opinion, and I think there's also going to be other Chaos subfactions, especially things like Thousand Suns, once we get to them, that are also going to be benefited from allying with Chaos Demons, which is such a big deal. A lot of that's buoyed on the fact of Tzeentch Flamers, though, and if we do see a significant nerf to Tzeentch Flamers in the future, that could change dramatically. So I think it's mostly the strength of one unit more than the entirety of the faction, but, here we go. Did Inky break a plate the other day? No. Inky has she's never broken a piece of, what's the word? Silverware? Plateware? I don't know. D-Gen, thanks for the membership, by the way. Welcome to Advanced Tactics. We have we got a lot of tactics videos on there, by the way, if you want to join on a membership. Next up, we have Death Guard. Death Guard are in a very sad place right now. They're not like they're not terrible, but they certainly don't measure up well with other armies, and I think we're going to put them in this like sort of bottom tier right here, somewhere around Adeptus Mechanicus. In my opinion, they are certainly worse than Adeptus Mechanicus, but it's probably going to end up being, I think they're going to be somewhere around the same level. Death Guard, I think, are really struggling, especially given the fact that they mostly have the same defensive profiles that other Chaos factions do. They're kind of relying on basically the same units, but they don't have the sort of the benefits of the more later codexes. So they're trying to fight through a metagame that's teched like specifically to kill them, and they don't have a lot of the tools that are required to do that, which is very sad for them. And they're really struggling right now. I don't know if there's any, builds where they can use Chaos Demons as well to the best of to their best effect. I don't feel like Nurgle Demons synergize particularly well with Death Guard, because you tend to just be doing the same thing that your Death Guard guys would be anyway. I do know that the last Dataslate did have some pretty solid buffs for Death Guard, especially for the standard Plague Marines. But it doesn't seem to me like it was enough to really like sort of catapult the faction into a huge win percentage. Yeah, Death Guard got the worst in terms of demon support, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I know we were talking about some proposed changes to Death Guard, and one of them was to give them some sort of defense against mortal wounds. I definitely feel. I think that mortal wounds are, especially with demons out right now, and everyone teching for armies like regular Chaos Space Marines with like Black Runes of Damnation on Chaos Terminators, the Armor of Contempt. Everyone's just packing mortal wounds to kill them, and Death Guard get hit doubly with that because their only method of defense that they use is just a damage reduction, which has no effect on mortal wounds, in addition to Armor of Contempt and 2+ save Terminators. So if you punch through all of that, they don't know what to do. I think we're also in a units like Tzeentch Flamers also hit Death Guard in a little bit of a weird way, because we're seeing more units that deal mass numbers of single damage attacks, and Death Guard have, again, very little defense against that, besides having good saves. So that also hurts them a lot too. They don't get flamers themselves. They get hit by flamers, and they get hit by the answers to flamers as well. So they're just like getting destroyed every which way. Poor Death Guard. Hopefully we see Death Guard. Get some buffs, please. Help out our plaguey boys over here. Let's go to Drukhari. So Drukhari I have pretty highly, and I think that is probably mostly the work of a couple people who are championing the faction. But that also includes Drukhari alongside Harlequins. So obviously the Eldar Codex came out with a couple buffs for Drukhari. You can take Harlequins alongside them, which gives them kind of more of the same. But Harlequin stuff is also, is obviously very effective. So if you have a lot of Drukhari backbone, you can then sort of stack in some of the Harlequin stuff that's really powerful. And that has made Drukhari much more powerful off the back of Harlequins. In addition to that, they also got the Corsair units out of the Eldari Codex. So they are able to now have access to command point regen, which with the Drukhari or the Corsair Psyker who goes into the unit with Fateful Divergence, which is something that they never had access to before. So and being a faction that's very reliant on stratagems, both offensively and defensively, means that that additional CP really helps Drukhari in a big, huge way. So Drukhari have been kind of a Cinderella story, I guess, at least over the last probably year or so. I mean, they started ridiculously strong. They got toned down, and they had like kind of a rocky experience. New Drukhari lists would come out and would be built. I think prior to the Craft Worlds Codex, they were kind of just relying on their Homunculus Covenant Army of Renown, which was like sort of mediocre. It did fine in a couple different places, but was never hugely impactful. And then the release of the Eldari Codex, and especially with Eldari themselves, with Asuryani, I should say, being toned down, people have sort of moved over within the super faction to Drukhari and found out that, turns out, these units are still pretty strong. And I think also the fact that they they do bring a lot of like these 1 damage attacks that can punch through defenses like demon saves and things like that, just by overloading them also helps. They also have a good output of mortal wounds, especially with like their stratagem to do mortal wounds when their bikers and hellions move over people. I've seen that do incredible damage to people. And they're a relatively high skill cap. So I think that it's mostly people who are very good at Ynnari playing Drukhari, but those people have been able to do very well for themselves, and that's where we're going to put Drukhari pretty up there. I guess it is true, chat, right? Cinderella like had a rich family to begin with, so really it's perfect. Yeah. They're Cinderella's ended up pretty strong. Next up we have Grey Knights. And we get to populate the bottom of our tier list again, because I do think Grey Knights are way down in the dumps here, chat. They're probably worse than Chaos Knights. I think we can say that. So maybe Chaos Knights not the worst in the game, but they are they're far down there. Grey Knights I think are keeping them company, however, and how far the mighty have fallen. Just I think almost entirely with nerfs to their secondary objectives, Grey Knights have become much less reliable. And especially the fact that a lot of, all of the Marine factions got the buff of the benefit of armor from contempt, which Grey Knights got on some of their units, but not all of them, which made, things like Dread Knights, which didn't get armor of contempt and, maybe could have, it makes them look very squishy compared to the rest of the Marine line at this point. They also have they don't have amazing profiles to match up into the metagame. Their psychic powers get hated out really easily because they have very few buffs to cast, and so they're a faction that's reliant on psychic powers going off, and they have a tough time getting those psychic powers off. And so once you're going into armies like other Chaos Demons, like Tyranids, like Thousand Suns, they have mass denies, and they have anti-psyker technology. Not to mention that people are bringing anti-psyker stuff in order to just defeat things like psychic interrogation. Grey Knights are, having trouble with that, in my opinion. I think you could. They're on the cusp of being fine, in my opinion, and I think that they basically need some secondary objectives. But right now, their secondary objectives are not super strong, and for that reason, they have a really low win rate currently. And they also got nothing really going on. Took Grey Knights to a GT in July, managed to go 4-2, but it was a hard-fought 4-2. Yeah, and I think it's one thing to keep in mind, chat, that I'm putting, obviously, we have some kind of hyperbolic categories here, right? But we're at a phase of the game where a bad win rate is low 40s, whereas if we were going to be talking about a tier list like this, a year ago, a bad win rate would be like 30%. And so I don't want anybody to come in and believe that these armies are, you cannot win with them if they're at the lower category there. It's just going to be a little bit more of an uphill battle than otherwise. But yeah, I mean, you certainly can X1 an event with any army on here with some good play and with some luck as well. You can maybe 5-0. Certainly you're going to be struggling pretty hard with some of the lower ones, but it is still possible. And I think that's, it goes to show you that the current iteration of the metagame, I think, is going to be pretty well balanced. There's certainly going to be some outliers where you're going to have a lot of trouble, but I don't want anyone to come into this and think that I'm going to say that Grey Knights are bad enough that they'll never win a game. I think that if you're a good player, you will go a positive win record with Grey Knights. I think that's the case for any of these factions. Need better secondaries and a little better shooting. I think that's probably fair. Grey Knight's shooting is so awkward because they have so many Storm Bolters that it almost feels like a lot of the power of the faction kind of vacillates wildly depending on how powerful a Storm Bolter is. And I remember when Grey Knights were at their peak, which was a year ago from now, that was when Drukhari was still strong, and Drukhari got destroyed by Storm Bolters. Everything's T3. Everything has a crappy save. So getting shot at by 20 Stormbolters out of random strike squads meant that that faction vaporized. And especially because you could, if you were good at sequencing attacks and sequencing your damage, you could smite a transport to death, force everyone to get out, and then shoot them with their Stormbolters, and then everyone would be dead. And you would just like remove chunks from the Drukhari army. And that's the game plan that Green Knights want to play, but we're at this stage right now where AP0 attacks, everything is so heavily armored. AP0 attacks are basically worthless. You try to shoot into like a Chaos Space Marine army with AP0, and everything's a Terminator, everything's a 3+ save and cover, everything's got Armor of Contempt, so even your silencers aren't punching through, and you're just like, wow, this sucks. I'm not doing anything. And then even like more lightly armored armies like Tyranids tend to have a 4+ save on their infantry, but all their infantry is T5. So at that point, you're wounding on 5s. You don't have any bonuses to wound on Stormbolters, unless you start dumping CP into them, which is also tougher because Warzone Nephilim has removed a lot of your CP. So, it's just pretty tough for old Grey Knights players right now, which I think is pretty strong. If you could buff Stormbolters in a couple ways, their shooting would be amazing. Yeah, I think so for sure. If you brought like old Psybolt ammunition back or something like that, right? Where it's like turn it into a Psy weapon, give it like +1 strength and +1 AP, and then if you were in, if you had empiric amplification on them, you were +1 damage too. Like suddenly you're cooking with gas, but it's so difficult for all that to happen. Remove all light cover. Maybe. That would certainly benefit some people more than others, but, might be fine. Just remove all AP modifiers from the game. Wouldn't really affect a Stormbolter, but sure. All right. We're moving on. We got Genestealer Cults next. I have Genestealer Cults. I have them somewhere between Craft Worlds and Adeptus Custodes. I think Genestealer Cults they're just fine. And I think they've been the punching bag of the game for a really long time. But it may be that it's kind of a Drukhari situation where it's not a huge player base, and so we get some skewed results from the fact that the people who are playing Genestealer Cults are doing relatively well. But those people are doing relatively well, and Genestealer Cults are certainly not the worst faction of the game any longer. I'm not going to go out of my way and say the Genestealer Cults are incredible or amazing, but I think they are, they're right in that category where they're not the best in the game. They're certainly not the worst, and you can win a tournament if you try really hard, and I think that's fine. I do think that they end up becoming kind of a mono army, though. There are some Force of the Hive Mind lists that are played by like 2 people who are doing very well, so you can bring them with regular Tyranids and maybe be effective, but obviously I think those results are a little bit skewed. But otherwise, I think you're locked into a custom subfaction, and I think their build is kind of set. And it may be that in the future that build, gets better or worse depending on the metagame. Right now, it's doing okay. But I think if the quad effect subfaction that they're currently running sees many changes at all, the faction could drop precipitously. So it's a little bit of a knife's edge for Genestealer Cult, but I think in the build that they currently have going well for them, they're doing fine. So unfortunately, I do think that you're kind of like you're pigeonholed into playing that build if you are going to be trying to be competitive with Genestealer Cults. But I don't think that the faction is in a particularly bad spot. They're just probably going to be pretty matchup dependent. GSC is a try-hard army. Only good players play GSC. Is it a try-hard army if only good players play it, or is it a skill check army? Because I feel like a try-hard army would be an army that's really easy to win with. So the people who try too hard end up playing that faction. I think we put this next faction up there as the tryhard army, but the next one we have is Harlequins. Harlequins did see a nerf in the latest data slate, and this also may be a hot take, chat. We might be spitting so many hot takes, but I don't think that nerf did almost anything. Maybe it removed a single tool from the toolbox of the light Sadith. It didn't affect any of the other Sadiths. And it didn't do anything to affect the other factions in the game, or the sub-factions in the faction. I mean, maybe you see the win rate of Light Sadith drop like from its ridiculous like 60% by 1 or 2 percentage points, but I don't think that's enough to put them out of what is the number 1 place in the game. Harlequins, in my opinion, undisputed champions of 40k right now. And I think that's also buoyed up by the fact, as we're considering allies, of the fact that they do also work well with other Eldari subfactions. So you can bring traveling players detachments in Drukhari lists, in Craftworlds lists, and they help support those game plans as well. You get to play the faction that you want to, but you also get to have the benefit of some of the best troops and transports in the entirety of the game, and those being Harlequin troops and Starweavers. I do think that it is a little unfortunate that the faction has kind of just turned into like 3 data sheets. You bring like Troop Masters, and then you bring like Shadow Seers and maybe a Death Jester, and then every single other point in your army goes into Troops and Starweavers. And I think that is problematic for the faction. I imagine that if we saw a points document come out with the last data slate, we would have seen points increases to those 2 units, because those basically are the entirety of Harlequin armies right now. And I think that's unfortunate, because as a faction that only has a couple of data sheets to begin with, they shouldn't be like forced into playing basically only 2. To an extent that it's silly as well. When you see every Harlequin list being 9 or 10 Starweavers, you're like, something's wrong here. I think we might have identified a balance issue. It's not quite as bad as it was when the Eldari Codex came out, and every Harlequin list was identical, and they all had 9 Voidweavers. But it's not great. And so I think we need a little bit more massaging on that faction for sure. Harley's on top isn't a bad take. All right, well that's good. I'm glad that chat agrees with me there. Harlequins is an entry level faction. You have 3 to 4 data sheets and you can spam them. I wouldn't say about necessarily about entry level. I do think that it's possible to play Harlequins very poorly. As easy as it is to win with Harlequins. And it's also assisted by the fact they have very good secondaries. But you also have to be good at playing the secondaries, and you have to be good at identifying when you can steal points from the other player. And if you're not good at that, you do have an army of like T3 dummies in transports, which are, those are mechanics that are very easy to mess up. So I think that there is a universe, there are going to be situations where somebody's brand new to the game, they come in, they see Harlequins at the top, and they buy a Harlequins army, and they go to a tournament, and they get pooped on. Because I don't think that Harlequins are like easy button, like auto win every game. I do think that once you are proficient at scoring, you're going to have a much easier time of it than other factions. But I don't think that they're like this, like just sit back and relax and we'll do whatever, and then you win. I also think that there's a situation, there are going to be circumstances, right, where you over or under commit with Harlequins and either don't take objectives away, so your opponent outscores you, which is death, or you overcommit and you lose too much stuff, which is also death. So I think like you have, it's a balancing act to play Harlequins, almost like you're an acrobat, and that is what it's going to be. Yeah, experience is 100% on how good your opponent is. I agree with that for sure. Yeah, you also have to be good at playing against Harlequins. And I think, fortunately, the people who like sort of survived through the Drukhari, Harlequins have had several periods in which they were strong. But surviving through those and like the Drukhari era, where just everything was a transport and everything was like a hyper-lethal melee unit inside a dedicated transport, you are probably more prepared to deal with Harlequins than somebody who's just coming out of it without really experiencing how the transports play. But I don't know. Get your transport busting mechanics out and ready to go. Grey Knights used to be great at that because they operated in 3 different phases. You need to, especially with between transports and face cap units, you need to be able to operate in multiple phases to kill transports and then kill the people inside. If you want to be able to do well, especially in a highly competitive metagame. If you can increase the cost of the Star Weaver, it fixes both. I could see that for sure. I think I'd like, yeah, I mean, maybe the problem's the Star Weaver. I do think that the problem's a little bit twofold between the troops and the Star Weavers. It's such a synergy between the two that the efficiency of Star Weavers means that you get troops in, like, you deliver troops more efficiently, but the troops themselves are already an efficient troops option. So there's, there's an argument to hit, either or both for sure at some point. I do think that change needs to be made at some point. Imagine taking something like 60 intercessors and people fear playing you. I mean, to be fair, also, that's been Tyranids, right? You just, go to the first troops option in the book, and you're like, I will take 1,500 points of that, please. And it's, suddenly the most powerful list in the metagame. Fortunately, no longer. Thank God. But, yeah, that's that's been the way of a lot of these codexes in 9th edition so far. Yeah. It sucks playing Death Guard against Harlequins. Yeah, I can imagine that, too. Yeah, Death Guard that are, oftentimes, so front-loaded in melee, trying to fight a faction that's entirely embarked in transport. Seems pretty brutal. All right, so we're moving on. We got Imperial Knights right here. And Imperial Knights are, I don't know, they're doing pretty good. In fact, I think we would just put them in the good spot. I think that they're kind of on the bottom end of the good spot. But I think Imperial Knights are just fine. They're trucking along. Their win rate has been pretty high. I don't really see anything changing that significantly. And they do tend to be a little bit matchup dependent, but they have a pretty consistent record of winning big events and stuff. They're just doing their thing. They're continuing to do their nightly duties. The one thing that I think is really interesting is the difference between Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights, because Imperial Knights have continued to do fairly well, but Chaos Knights have dropped more and more as time goes on, despite the codexes being basically simultaneous. So I think the fact that Imperial Knights synergize better together is a big deal, and I do think that their faction abilities are much stronger than Chaos Knights, which is good for them. Plus, they have a billion combos to do mortal wounds, which is really important right now. Whereas Chaos Knights don't quite have that same level of redundancy. But also, I guess they have an army renown too. that has certainly helped on top. It's interesting. Do Knights still get smooshed by Tau? I think it depends on the Tau list. If you are playing many Hammerheads, then it is almost, from my experience, it's almost entirely a go first game. Because the Knights can kill enough stuff on the first turn to fight their way out of it. If you have so many vehicles that you can't hide them all. If you have a Tau list that can hide appropriately from the Knights list, then you will probably win. But if you're bringing a ton of vehicles or something like that, the Knights will just shoot you to death, and whoever goes first will just shoot the other person to death. That's what I have to say about that. Yeah, all right. Well, that was that was a good talk about Imperial Knights. We nailed it. Next up is Leagues of Votann. This is going to be an interesting discussion because I think I have Leagues of Votann. This one, man, I don't know where to put this faction right now. So currently, based on their results right now, chat, I would put them just below Custodes. I think they're right in the middle of the game. That said, that is going to increase when the full range comes out, because I don't believe at this stage that any events have allowed Votann to be played in the entirety of their range. So I think, for safety's sake, we could put them ahead of Custodes, and probably somewhere around where Imperial Knights end up. But with the caveat that that could change dramatically. and you know, we don't have great results to talk about currently. We don't have a ton of different list archetypes that have risen to the top in the competitive scene, because right now all you can play is Pioneers and Hearthkin Warriors. So that's what most lists look like. The lists look like 60 Hearthkin Warriors and like 27 Pioneers, and that's it. That's the whole list. But once we start seeing, maybe we put a land fortress or two in, maybe we start putting Sagittor ATVs, like maybe there's Berserks in there. I just don't know what that list is going to look like and how effective it's going to be. So I think that middle is fine for Votann right now, but definitely with the caveat that I expect that placement to change sometime in the not too distant future. You'll probably beat Imperial Knights? Yeah. I mean, just one faction beating another faction in a one-on-one isn't necessarily what we're looking at. But I probably agree with you. I think that's probably the case. Sir Dragdord, Votann pretty balanced right now. I think by the looking at the results we have, I think that they are. I do think that we have to consider some. There's going to be some statistical errors in there. First off, that the people playing Votann are going to be the people who are enfranchised in Votann. So, like, the people who are currently playing, like a person going to a GT with Votann is going to be someone who is familiar enough with their army that they're going to be doing well to begin with. So I think that the people who are going in with the army are currently the ones who will probably be going in with a winning win rate regardless. So I don't think we have like a holistic view of what the player base is going to look like. And then obviously on top of that, we have no idea how impactful their other stuff is. So right now, I would agree with you. In, a couple weeks, who knows?
Thanks for the content. Drive home is made better.
Smadix, 1990. Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate that. I'm glad I could make your drive home. I'll brighten your day a little bit with some 40k talk. Thank you so much for dropping the super chat there. Once players get berserks and land fortresses, as well as some experience with the army, it's sure to go up. Yeah, I mean, that's the feeling I get, right? Like, with more option, right now, they're doing okay, but they're probably doing, if we were to give every 40k player a Votann army right now and have everyone, like, play in a GT or whatever, their win rate would probably be lower than it is right now, in my opinion. I think that their win rate is artificially, being propped up. That win rate is only going to get better with new units, but at the same time, when more people pick up the faction, I think it's going to decrease. If we're looking at how good their best lists are, they may be sort of up a little bit higher in that good tier, but I think right now they're probably going to end up being in the middle of the road, which I think is fine. Yeah, I don't know. That is a real question, right? Like how much the faction increases. Because, the new stuff is going to be more powerful, but there is a simplicity to just running the same unit over and over again. All right, let's move on. We got Necrons here. We get to spit some more fire here, chat. I have Necrons. Who's ready? Who's ready for this, chat? I have Necrons one step ahead of Imperial Knights. They are just fine. That's what I have to say about that. They're certainly an above average faction, but Necrons are, I think, wildly overestimated by the metagame. I do think you have to be good at playing Necrons to compete with Necrons, which is why we don't see their win rate being super high. Because I do think a lot of people pick them up as being like a first order optimal army, where I can win really easily just by running models of my opponent. I'm going to play this army, but then as soon as they hit a player who's better than them, I lose. That said, the players who are very good at Necrons are extremely good with Necrons, and I think that is what people are most afraid of, is the people who are very good at scoring. On the flip side, though, Necrons did just lose a relatively large piece of technology, which was that core keyword on their character vehicles. So no longer... they have a much harder time scoring things like Code of Combat, since now they actually have to roll their dice instead of getting infinite rerolls. And they don't have the same level of redundancy in shooting with things like Catacomb Command Barges and the Silent King. So whether or not that means that we see like a shift maybe away from things like Catacomb Command Barges, I still don't think that you lose the Silent King in your lists, but I do think that you may end up giving up access to a free roll stratagem like Code of Combat, which does overall make their game plan less consistent. I don't think, other than that, I don't think the changes really sort of dramatically impact their win rate, but I do think that the fact that the faction is actually much harder to play than people give them credit for does keep them from being sort of right at the top there. And especially once you compare, like if you compare Necrons, especially, you know, their win rates to the factions that are going to be at the top of the game, Necrons like don't even hold a candle. They get they get blown out by other factions pretty well. How bad would Necrons be without easy secondaries? That is a really good question. They would be much worse for sure. I think they would probably be 1 to 2 tiers lower without easy secondaries. They could build to control primary objectives really well, but obviously that game plan's less consistent than scoring secondaries like automatically. But if they basically just couldn't take any faction secondaries, or like had faction secondaries equal to, you know, it's like the Tyranids or something that has like sort of mediocre faction secondaries, they would drop precipitously for sure. A lot of their power level is wrapped up in their faction secondaries, which is why I do think that the character vehicle nerf is actually impactful, because there's situations where you're like, well, I don't want to tank ancient machineries because perform the action on turn one is like, you know, on the third or fourth objective is reliant on a dice roll. So I'm just going to take Code of Combat because you're MSU enough that I'm almost guaranteed to score a 14 on that. Now, especially if they drop their CCB and they're only relying on the Silent King, who doesn't have rerolls, now that game plan is significantly tougher. So that's what I have to say about that. Necrons are a gatekeeper army? Yes, I agree with that for sure. Is the Silent King still an auto take? I think so. I don't think that you drop the Silent King. I think you do drop your command barge for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it is unfortunate for the faction, right? Like, I don't think it's healthy for the faction to like be built around the Silent King. I think it's, you know, it is what it is. And one of the tenets of design that GW is moving towards is making these big characters that players want to include in their army to kind of define the power of a faction. I think it's too far with Necrons because I think the Silent King is too powerful compared to everything else in the Codex. But I think a lot of that is also just internal balance. Like, so much of the rest of the Codex is basically unplayable. Not the entire thing, but a lot of it. It is a little bit funny because, you know, your faction, your secondaries and your sub-faction abilities are very strong in Necrons. So you end up feeling like the value of your units is better, but on a point per point basis, if you didn't include their sub-faction abilities, most other armies in the game would out damage you. It's just the fact that you have like pre-game moves and objective secured and stuff like that kind of buoys them up. So many Necron units do similar things. You never run the units that aren't the best at one thing. I think yes and no. There are units that do. I think like probably maybe the best example is like a plane versus the two kinds of guys with death lasers, like the Doomsday Arcs or the Doomstalkers. And you basically will just play. You'll only ever play planes for the most part. You basically will never play the other stuff. So I think that there are some examples of that. I do think also that, like, you know, people will play Wraiths plus Ophidians plus Scorpic Destroyers, even though those are all the same. So I think it depends entirely on how on how effective the thing you're trying to do is. Sonic King didn't launch as mandatory. It was their simple solution to a broken book. Yeah, I think that's also fair. But also, to be fair, like, I think Necrons may be the single most damning evidence, like, against the core keyword, right? Because the faction, basically, like, the usefulness of your unit is defined by whether or not you have the core keyword in factions that have powerful aura effects, and they realized that the only way to make Necrons fair was to remove it from everything, which obviously increased the power level of the stuff that did have the effects that would affect the core keyword, but also just kind of goes to show that, like, you don't really need to core restrict stuff. You can be more granular with how you assign keywords to things than just like core or not core. And I think that they're learning that more and more now. But because Necrons was such an early codex release, they just like messed it up. Make Doomstalkers great again? I would love Doomstalkers to be great again. I don't believe, chat, that I have ever seen a Doomstalker in real life. Like, I can't recall going to a tournament and looking at someone's army that had a Doomstalker in it at any point in my entire life. Which sucks, because that model is super cool. I would love that thing to be played. All the spidery boys in Necrons are super sick. It's just like really, it's super unfortunate that they are just mostly garbage, for sure. They've switched from core to infantry in a lot of the newer books. Yeah, I think that's like a really good example. I also think that I would love them to be more specific in like kind of like tribal benefits, if that makes sense, chat. And they tried it a little bit in Space Marines, and then they like forgot about it and they went and did something else. Where like captains and lieutenants would affect your core units, which was generally your infantry, whereas tech marines would affect your vehicles. And so you could build your army along like different branches of the tree, right? Where we could focus on infantry and give them the rerolls, or we could give them hit buffs with the tech marines. The problem was that they also give dreadnoughts core, and that was just stupid. Like, dreadnoughts are just the best vehicle in every situation in the codex, and they just messed it up. But I would like to also see that more often, and even like more specific. You have a character who's, an assault marine who benefits all of your jump infantry, full stop. And so, like, you want to be building these thematic, sort of retinues for these characters. And I think that's where it should have been going, instead of this, like, core versus non-core keyword. That's just silly. Also, Doomstalker is a monster, not a vehicle, so it doesn't have core. Oh, no. Is it really? It's a monster? No way. That kind of lampshades how little I've looked at the Doomstalker, because I just assumed it was a big walker. Is it really a monster? Oh my god, Jen. It is a monster. Why? It's a robot. It's a big robot. What? Why is a Doomstalker a monster, but like a Dreadnought's not a monster? Jesus. That's so dumb. Man, what an oversight, too. Ridiculous. 8th Ed Nid Codex had characters to buff certain units, primes to buff warriors, nerf throws to buff zone throws. Was cool. Compartmentalization. Yeah. I do think that they didn't do that particularly well. I think mostly because they were like aura effects, and so you were like, they would only come up in specific situations. But I think if they were like command phase targeted effects, we were like, target one of this unit type within 12, and they were a little bit more broad, then I think that would be pretty good for sure. Gilliman is a monster? Yeah. Well, Gilliman makes sense as a monster, right? Because he's a very big man. Although, in fairness, now that they've like expanded the definition of infantry to basically be like anyone who's less than 2 stories tall and has 2 legs, so you could like recharacterize a lot of the stuff in the game from being monsters to being infantry. I imagine that if once we see a 10th edition Space Marine Codex or something, Gilliman becomes an infantry. Is the Reanimator any good? It actually is, chat. It is in the lists that lean really heavily on Scarab Swarms. Because you can shoot the laser at the Scarab Swarms, and then they have so many wounds that when they take, you can stack multiple defensive effects on them. So you can give them the 5+ invulnerable save from the Chronomancer. You can shoot them with the laser beam, so if they don't get one shot, which is basically impossible because they have 36 wounds in a unit, then you have a much better chance of coming back to life. Then you can have Tomb Spiders behind them to regenerate them, and you can have one unit of Scarabs actually basically between the stacking of those effects, you can have one unit of Scarabs basically act as like two units of Scarabs from a survivability standpoint. I do think that list is very good. It's a little one-dimensional because the Scarabs don't actually do any damage to your opponent. So if your opponent ends up being good at killing them, you're just like, sorry, I guess I die. But I do think that this is actually pretty strong. If a Dreadnought is a vehicle, why isn't a Necron warrior? Yeah, down that road lies madness, chat. For sure. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have the Orks. Orks are another one I think is just solidly in this like fine category. I think I have them, yeah, basically in this area between. The cat's having a field day right now. Basically in this area between Genestealer Cults and Adeptus Custodes. I think Orks are they're just doing their thing, man. They're just chilling and hanging out, and sometimes they go first and win super easily, and sometimes they don't. I don't see them as being sort of dramatically powerful. They tend to be kind of matchup dependent, like most of the things in this category, to be fair, and a little bit go firsty, but that is the case of everything in that middle section. I do think that there are matchups and situations where if you go first with Orks, you basically just win, and I think that's fine for them. It does feel to me like Orks have like 2 viable builds, one of them more so than the other one. The kill rig build where you're like 2+ kill rigs with Beast Snagga Boys inside with 15 or 3 units of Squig Hogs, so usually 15 Squig Hogs. Plus, whatever. That's generally the more powerful build, which is a little sad that they really only have one. But I think you can also play the Speed Wa, and it's fine. So that's okay, I guess. But overall, yeah, I think Orks are just doing whatever. Ork internal Codex balance needs huge help. Yeah, I don't disagree for sure. Yeah, Inky heard Orks and started running in big circles. For sure. She's like, what? The Wa's coming? I'm out of here. They're going to advance and charge soon. Look out. Yeah. But I mean, I don't disagree. I think that's the case for a lot of the stuff at the bottom end is like you typically have one build that you use. And that's certainly the case for Orks too. I think that is an unfortunate part of the Codex. I don't think that sort of dramatically changes how powerful they are from a meta game standpoint, because you're not usually looking at the stuff that is the number 1 or number 2. The stuff that isn't like the best in the faction anyway. It's just that they tend to have a smaller pool of that stuff. Yeah, Orks also, I think, have a bit of the Space Marine problem as well, chat, where they have so many units that it's hard for all of them to be playable all the time. And especially since, it was a little obvious in the last Codex that they were like, oh, hey, we're going to bring in a whole new sub-faction of orcs with new vehicles and new characters and cavalry and new infantry and all this stuff. So we have to fit that into an ecosystem that already has like 30 years of orc releases. And they were just like, fuck it, it's better, whatever, which, sucks, but it is what it is. And I think that's part of the problem with the faction is like so much of the stuff is unplayable because there's no physical way to make it all playable because that faction has so many entries. Not as many as Space Marines, but it's getting pretty close. They have a lot of random stuff. The old Primaris Orks, yeah, basically. For sure. All right, let's move on from orcs. Let's talk about Adepta Sororitas. I think Adepta Sororitas are, in my opinion, top 4. I'm gonna put them here for now, in the sake of for the in the name of balancing out the hill. But they could also be here, probably. I think they're somewhere in this area. I think they're just extremely good. They have really good secondaries. Their army tends to be very reliable. Miracle Dice will do that for you, and they have a couple different builds that they can play. It's normally Bloody Rose, but I do think that the Valorous Heart list is actually very strong. I think I'm probably a little bit biased because I keep streaming Ash play it. But the fact that they also did not receive any changes in the data slate certainly makes them pretty powerful. So I think that is great for them. So good on Adepta Sororitas. I don't know if there's much else to say about them. They're just very good. So, I think that there's much less in the way, speaking of internal balance, of internal imbalance in Adeptus Sororitas and other factions, and I think that also helps them out a lot, where a lot of their units are very playable. Not all of them, for sure. There's still some units in there that don't see play. But most of them are very playable, and most of them complement each other as well. So you tend to see a wide breadth of units in the Sororitas faction, almost to the point where it creates like kind of a mono list, just because you want to take, whatever, as many selections of individual other units out of the faction that you can. Oh boy, Space Marine next. All right, we're gonna get into. What pregame right is playable? I mean, ultimately, who cares? Are we gonna, we can talk about the internal balance of units, but if you want to talk about the internal balance of a single rule, whatever. I do think that sacred rites are like a little silly. Passion's always the best, and like to the point that like it's weird that they still let you pick. I'm a little salty because they got rid of adaptive traits on Tyranids being pregame selectable, but they kept sacred rites. But it wouldn't have mattered because you just always pick passion. But I don't think that's it's not like a balance thing so much as that's just what your sub-faction ability, your faction ability is. You just get exploding sixes, which is very strong. All right, let's move on. We can talk about Space Marines now, chat. It's exciting. Some people talking about Space Marines here. Yeah, like we said at the top, chat. I've just put all the Space Marines together, and that's just how we're gonna do it. All right. I considered them as basically the average of their parts. I do think that if you want to be competitive with Space Marines, you're playing probably out of a selection of like Blood Angels or Iron Hands or maybe Salamanders, and like there's an argument for Space Wolves. But at the top end of the faction, you're going to be playing those sub-factions. Other people will be playing the other sub-factions, which are all mostly garbage. And, maybe those sub-factions need fixing. Every faction in the game has sub-factions that are very bad and no one plays. The difference is that people actually play them in Space Marines, but I don't actually think that we need to really consider those ones quite as much. Which is why Space Marines are all going to be together. So I think that we see Space Marines somewhere in this area. I don't like the nerf or the buffs that they got. I don't think really changed the faction in any meaningful way. It maybe made some some builds that were not using a very meta supplement selection a little bit more reliable, but there's going to be so many situations where your opponent just doesn't give you the ability to score shock tactics. It depends very wildly on the mission and the matchup and how your opponent wants to play, and I don't think it actually changed anything. And especially if you're playing a faction like Blood Angels, you're just going to be taking Relentless Assault. That said, I don't think Blood Angels are that great. I don't think that Blood Angels or Iron Hands or any of those factions currently fight particularly well against stuff in the middle of the row. Outside of individual players doing very well. Obviously, like any of the factions in this game, in this chart, if you're very good at the faction, you're going to do well. But I think that if we're going to compare win percentages of a Space Marine chapter to the win rates of any chapter in this middle row or above, I think that they would be beating that Space Marine chapter, which is why we're going to put Space Marines below them. And that's what I have to say about that. Imperial Fists, if you want to play hard mode, yeah. Imperial Fists and Raven Guard. I think it's not an argument that they're the worst armies in the game. That's the interesting thing about Space Marine sub-factions, though, is that were those sub-factions to be in any other army, no one would play them. But because it's a Space Marine chapter, it gets an appreciable percentage of the metagame. And that's just kind of weird. But yeah, it's like saying, play, I don't know, play Chaos Space Marines, but only play a really bad sub-faction. Like Night Lords or something. But Night Lords aren't even that bad. I would say World Eaters. Maybe that's a hot take, but I don't think that sub-faction's particularly good. Get off. Why would you lampshade yourself like that? Why would you tell on yourself? You're not supposed to be on the table, you silly goose. And then you just told me? You're like, look at me, I'm on the table. I did that thing you didn't like me to do. Just stand right here. Ah. The ones with their own codex supplement deserve their own icon. But we don't do that for any other faction, chat. I think the 40k community has to take a good, long, hard look at Space Marines and ask what they want the faction to be. Because otherwise, right, we would be recording Bloody Rose Sororitas versus every other Sororitas faction separately. We would be recording every Drukhari list that has a Cult of Strife faction separately than the rest of them, and it just gets silly at that point. At some point, you just have to decide whether or not you want a faction to be, whether or not you want a faction to include all of its supplements, or whether or not you want to break every single faction down into its sub-factions. And it's just weird that they function a little bit differently than every other faction, but I think that it's fine to lump them together, especially in a situation like this. I don't know if I would do this if one faction was dramatically outperforming the others, but right now it's not, and that's the sad truth of the army, is that Space Marines don't really break 50% ever, and that just sucks. And there's not a standout amongst them. The top chapters are kind of clustered together. The bottom chapters all suck, and that's basically just where you're at. What are you doing, Kat? She wants to be on the podcast. You want to talk? This is my co-host, Inky. Please don't go on the keyboard. Not on the keyboard. Not right now. Supplement Space Marines don't deserve an icon if Tyranids don't have one. Yeah. Alpha Legion, chat. There's the one. See, they're so secretive that I forgot they existed. So Alpha Legion clearly is is succeeding in their mission. Give internal souping back and make Space Marines a faction that get buffs for working with other sub-factions. It would be kind of cool if Space Marines could ally more readily with other Imperial factions. Because that was always kind of the thing. If you could take like Devastator drop pods in factions that weren't just Space Marines and they like were still good, that would not only be cool and interesting, but also thematically appropriate. But they don't do that, so it is what it is. Space Marines dominated early 9th and everyone told them to wait for their codex. Yeah, but on the flip side, like, I mean, you don't want any faction to be like terrible, right? I think that's just kind of rude. But also, Space Marines are such a large proportion of the player base that you want them, like, I would love it for Space Marines to just be in the middle, right? Like, constantly. But they are either always real, like, too good or too bad, and it doesn't feel like GW's ever been able to balance them to the point that they're where they should be, which is, in my opinion, like dead middle. Any faction can be strong if piloted well against someone who doesn't know what they're doing. That's true. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they didn't dominate for super long. I mean, they were strong once their new codex came out, but they weren't too really. They weren't too broken. When the edition came out, they were super busted because mostly because like IAC hadn't changed and they had a bunch of broken stuff in Imperial Armor Compendium, which is, you know, it is what it is. And Shuma, I agree also that like, oh, it's this faction's turn to be good, or it's this faction's turn to be bad. I don't think that that's healthy for the game, for sure. I think that we're pushing towards a point where the faction power level is going to be much more compressed, and it's going to be less mobile, where factions don't like do these like 180 flips quite as often, where they go from being the worst up to being the bad and then cycle through. And I think that's only going to be healthy for the game. It's like, and you know, maybe I'm a little biased too, but speaking as a content creator, it's like really awkward to do, especially power ranking things where they change constantly. And if we get to the point where we have a pretty good idea of where factions are in relation to each other, it's going to help like onboarding processes. It's going to help content be more evergreen. It's going to help teach people, you know, how to play competitively more easily. And you know, hopefully we get there. Remove Grey Knights from 40k. Yeah. Next up, we have Tau, chat. So, Space Marines, not that great. I don't think that's really shocking anyone. But next up, we're going to be talking about the Tau Empire. And Tau are actually pretty strong. Where are we going? I have them just below Adepta Sororitas. So we may have to shuffle some of the stuff from this this row down a little bit because we're kind of running out of space. But they are, I don't believe, as good or as consistent as Adeptus Sororitas, but they are still pretty strong. They do have a couple of different builds that they're representing. They have a couple of different sub-factions that are very competitive. And between, you know, vehicle lists that are focused on Sunshark bombers and hammerheads and things like that, to Riptide lists, to Crisis battlesuit lists, all of those are pretty good. And I think there's a relatively wide variety in what Tau can play. Their game plan is super unique, which is interesting and makes it difficult for people to pick them up, especially coming from other factions. But I think the fact that they continue to put up 5-0 and 6-0 results pretty consistently, I think speaks to the fact that Tau are still doing pretty well. A lot of top players are actually playing Tau right now, absolutely, and especially folks who are. There are definitely people who are super good at Tau, who are focusing even harder on them, and I do think that those people maybe at the upper end of the game are maybe increasing that win rate a little bit higher than would be normally, but those flag waivers are certainly showing other people how to do it, and I think for that reason Tau are continuing to be relatively competitive. Tau is easy mode. Don't believe that for sure. I do think that the faction is legitimately hard to play. I think it being right around Drukhari feels very appropriate. They're definitely better than Drukhari, and they win events more easily than Drukhari. But they both play the game differently than other factions, and you have to sort of learn a whole unique play style to be competitive with Tau. Honestly, some people just don't enjoy having an opponent at all. The most enjoyable game is the closest game playing into an opponent that has to play skillfully. I agree with that. My favorite, I always say that my favorite games are the ones that are really close, and we both have to pull out of the stops and make really interesting plays, and then I win at the end. I totally agree with that for sure. And to be fair, I think Tau do that, but in a different way than other people. A different way than people expect, right? Because Tau are absolutely this glass cannon. If you play Tau poorly, and speaking from experience, as a bad Tau player, speaking from experience, if you play Tau poorly and you let your opponent get to grips with you, or even get line of sight to you in a lot of situations, you just lose almost instantly. So you have to play this keep away game, and your opponent, you and your opponent have to play this cat and mouse game where they're trying to get to grips with you and you're trying to escape them. And it's really interesting. It's really different than any other faction. And it's not interactive in a way where you're like making fight phases against each other. But it is interactive with a way where you're both playing this game of maneuver warfare. And if there are all these people who complain about Tau, I don't want to just get shot to death or whatever. But on the flip side, if the Tau player doesn't, if you don't allow the Tau player to just shoot at you and you're able to prevent their game plan from happening, then you will also win. So, and it feels equally as bad for the Tau player to lose that that game as it does for you to get shot at. So I think it's a much more interactive game than people give that matchup credit for. Yeah. Sycamore FPV, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, they hit super hard, but they don't take a hit. And they don't fight for objectives very well. So you have to play this like attritional game plan where you're not stealing objectives from them, you're killing people on the objectives and like trying to keep space with your opponent as much as you can. Mostly hate Sun Sharks because there's no counterplay. Yes. I think aircraft is toxic and should be gone from the game for sure. I agree. I 100% agree with you there. I think Sun Sharks, it's possible to mitigate the amount of damage that they do. It's just not possible to mitigate them doing damage to you. But yeah, generally I agree that when you have the opportunities to shoot at Sun Sharks or whatever, and they exemplar the Kalyan off the table, and then they come in and either they shoot you or they stay on the table and then they run off the table and they bomb you, and then they come in next turn and they shoot you. So they get like 2 activations out of the Sun Sharks before anything happens to them. But it just being bombed by 2 Sun Sharks doesn't oftentimes end up being worth 310 points of damage over the course of the game if they want to keep them alive. Tau have a fairly low skill floor. But they have an extremely high skill ceiling. I think that they have a high skill floor, right? And in that it requires you to be relatively high skill to succeed with them, I think. Still don't understand how a flamer auto hits an aircraft. Because it's a game, chat. That's why. I don't know. It's a super flamethrower from the future. Who knows? All right, next up we have some weirdos. 1,000 Suns as the next bad boy. And actually, interestingly, they're next to each other on my list here. So I have 1,000 Suns being somewhere in here. I think that this could have the opportunity to change. I know that the 1,000 Suns plus... I talked to Animander about this on stream recently. But I think that the 1,000 Suns certainly have the opportunity to be very strong, but it's gonna be it's mostly contingent on Chaos Demons, and we haven't quite seen them put up like a glut of results yet. It has been pretty, or excuse me, I talked to Liam Bissell about it, and it has been, it's been pretty constrained sort of into particular events where they've been doing really, really well. And I do think that they are going to be a very, sort of skill intensive faction to play. Thousand Sons are pretty funky because I do think a lot of people fail with them, given the fact that the faction's so slow. And I do think that they also suffer from a pretty significant faction imbalance, because I think that the army is basically balanced around playing Cult of Duplicity. And if you don't play Cult of Duplicity, things are going to be tough for you. And you can compound that playstyle with Flamethrower, with Tzeentch Flamers. But at the end of the day, if you're not playing teleports for your Scarab Occult Terminator bricks, you're going to have a bad time. And I think that maybe the more people like filter into the mixed Tzeentch list, that's a bunch of Thousand Sons guys, like a bunch of Terminators, a bunch of Rubrics, and a bunch of Flamers, then maybe we see that faction get pumped up. Right now, I do see them as certainly above average, but I don't know if they edge up into like that truly top of the game. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Thousand Sons has so much counterplay and so many bad matchups, you can't play them with any consistency. That may be the case for sure. The matchups can be bad. You are sort of relying on either mortal wounds, which is generally pretty good. There are very few factions where you're just like, oh no, I have mortal wounds, I don't do anything. And you also have like sort of mass 1 damage attacks, either from Flamers or from Scarab Occults. You can run into situations where that doesn't get you enough damage, but 99% of the time it does. The real question marks become like sort of how good you are at screening. I think that Thousand Sons list can be very bad if you are able to screen them out effectively, if you can sort of take the table. And especially if they're trying to manifest demons onto the table, things get really awkward by being screened out. But on the flip side, there are very few factions that actually do that. You also get hit with anti-psyker stuff pretty consistently too. I think my cat just broke something. 90% of Thousand Sons players at GTs are running Duplicity. Yeah, that is important. I imagine that the folks who are not playing Cult of Duplicity and that last couple percentage points there are probably dropping the total faction win right down a little bit. It's always been your opinion that Thousand Sons need to be able to multicast the same spells. Just seems weird they can only cast the same spells once at a time. I think it's fine, honestly. Well, actually, first off, they can. Hold up. They just have a ritual for that. Yeah, this is usually why Inky gets locked up during streams, and I think that we're going to go back to doing that. She has been a terror today. Yeah, so they can multicast individual spells, right? But also I think being able to multicast like blessings and stuff is probably unnecessary. Maybe they should have the ability to like recast failed spells, but I do think that there are I think there are a lot of factions that you can make the same argument for. A 25-point preacher with Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude beats the entire faction. Yeah. That is the downside of this anti-psyker effects. It does make things really weird. All right, let's move on. We'll talk about the last one here. So Thousand Sons, pretty good. I think we'll probably see them rise in the not too distant future as they kind of adopt to the introduction of Chaos Demons, but right now we haven't really seen that. Last, before we talk about Tyranids, which didn't get a picture in here, we have Ynnari. Ynnari are a weird one. I think we put them here. They are significantly better than regular craft worlds, but I don't really want to put them above Thousand Suns. So I think probably somewhere in that middle area is where they go. Ynnari may be the single hardest skill cap in the game. I think that if you are a strong Ynnari player, you are, you basically you pump yourself up 1 to 2 levels. If you're a weak Ynnari player, you are just very bad. But so it depends a lot on how good you are at using the Incarn, and how good you are at using sort of the many different. You're playing 3 codexes jammed together effectively. So being able to utilize all those tools effectively is very important. And I do think that it becomes greater than the sum of its parts if you're good at it. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of Ynnari players who just don't do as well. And I do think as well, if we're going to look at things from a raw sort of data collection standpoint, there are a lot of people playing that bomber list with a Void Raven bomber in it, and they're like, this is the Ynnari list. I don't think it's that good. I think you just play regular Eldar stuff. You play some Drukhari, you play some Harlequins, you play a bunch of Craft World stuffs, and you jam the Incarn into it, and then your list is very strong. But I don't think that playing sort of mediocre airplanes is the way forward for Ynnari players. That might be a hot take, but that's what I think. But I think that if you do play that sort of standard MSU style Ynnari list, then I think that, and you're very good at activating it, then I think you are in a very good spot. But that said, it does take you some tough. Ynnari, the 5-ed faction? 100%. Absolutely. For sure. Can I give you a quick Disciples of Be'lakor take? It's just worse than playing Chaos Demons. Just play regular Chaos Demons. That's what I have to say. I think that you're playing Chaos Space Marine units outside of Legion, right? Which you don't want to do, and you're also playing Chaos Demons without having access to Greater Demons, which you also don't want to do. So it's like the worst of both worlds. I would just play regular Chaos Demons and call it a day. Jamie Flynn, skill floor, meaning the worst you can possibly do with a faction. Demons are a high skill floor. Copy paste a list of what if kittens won 5 games in a row to know all the strats. That is a good one because demons do not have any strats. There is not a lot going on in the codex. I agree with that though, for sure. Yeah, demons and Tyranids probably high skill floor, and then you'd see factions like maybe Adeptus Sororitas and Harlequins and Ynnari, like we're talking about right now, probably lower, I guess, by that definition. That makes sense though. All right, let's add some Tyranids to this chat. Let me go grab a Tyranid picture, and we will. Who are we gonna use? Let's use a Swarm Lord, I guess. I gotta find a guy. Here's a half Tyrant. That's close enough. Ta-da! Here he is. All right, we did have Tyranids. See, they were here the whole time. They were just hiding. They were burrowed. Look at that! Amazing, incredible. All right, so we're placing Tyranids now. The last one, and I think I'm gonna put Tyranids here. Maybe we are continuing the train of hot takes here, chat. But I'm going to place Tyranids just after Demons on the top of the game. So I think a number 3 faction is pretty strong for Tyranids. Tyranids are really super good. They don't have quite the same impact that Demons do because they don't end up going into other factions. And I do think that to some extent, and probably format depending, people are sort of slowly getting their number where other builds are, and especially builds involving Chaos Demons looking at you, Tzeentch Flamers, have been being developed that do have a positive win rate against Tyranids. I also think that there is I think there maybe is a universe where Adeptus Mechanicus starts to hit Tyranids to some extent because of how powerful enriched rounds ends up being. We'll have to see how that ends up. I have no idea. I'm just kind of spitballing, but I do think that they would certainly be that number 2 spot next to Harlequins if it wasn't for the Leviathan nerf. I think that we're gonna see. Been talking about that skill floor again, right? The floor of Tyranids is going to be lowered a bit because people can't just like jam 20 like Tyranid warriors with 4+ transhuman onto the table and then like roll the dice and say go. That no longer works. You're just playing normal Tyranid warriors, and if you're playing them in High Fleet Leviathan, they're probably slower than they should be, which means that you're not really getting any benefit. I think that the people who are good at the faction are going to gravitate towards High Fleet Kraken, and they're going to continue to do well. But I think that a lot of people are probably going to move to other High Fleets or move off of the faction because it does become harder to play. But that said, I don't think they like drop precipitously in win rate or anything. I just think that they're going to be incredibly strong. I think they're gonna continue to be incredibly strong. I think that if were we to take a look at this, 6 months down the road, if nothing dramatically changes in the interim, I think that we see Tyranids. Maybe they've dropped 2 or 3 percentage points in win rate, but I don't think it goes any farther than that. And that's what I have to say about that. Where would I place demons without flamers? Ooh, that's a really good question, actually, chat. I would demons without flamers. I think I would drop to either. I'll get my telestrator here. I think demons without flamers. I would drop to probably beginning of like somewhere around here. In like the Imperial Knights area. There's probably lists with like that just spam greater demons that are probably fine, but I don't think they're anywhere near as close as they are without flamers. And that would be if you like removed flamers from the codex entirely. If flamers just get a little bit of like a love tap, if they like stay the same points cost and go to D3 plus 3 shots instead of D6, or they go up to like 30 points or something, I think demons, maybe they drop down below Tyranids, but they're somewhere in there. If you just entirely cut flamers out of the codex entirely, they would probably drop to like the middle of the road, in my opinion. It is basically codex flamers for sure, chat. 100%. Which is better now, Maw Claws or Reaper post-nerf? I was of the opinion that Maw Claws was better to begin with, so I think it's Maw Claws. To be fair, though, I didn't play like meta games where the mortal wounds were super relevant. So I think that, I think it's Maw Claws. I think I'd still play Reaper as my second guy. Just, having mortal wounds on top of damage is fine, but I think Maw Claws is too strong. It's so strong. I don't know about too strong, but it's very strong. Nids will go up. The crutches got taken away, so now people have to play the better lists. Yeah, but on the flip side, the people who are being... I think that I don't know. I think that there were a lot of people playing Tyranids because they could put 2 Harpies, like 2 Leviathan Harpies in a list with 20 warriors, and they could win games. And I think that it's like everyone who like flooded to Adeptus Mechanicus when Adeptus Mechanicus first released, right? And then we're just like killing everyone with Iron Strider Ballistari. I think that there's going to be those people who had like who had an artificially high win rate because the like brain dead archetype was really strong that will drop, right? That they'll leave the faction, that their win rate will decrease. They'll have to play a faction that like actually requires them to think about the game. And I think those people will most likely offset the people who are going to be, going to a new faction and doing well. Like I have a tough time imagining that, like going from Leviathan to Kraken, while Kraken is still good and is probably at least as good as Leviathan. I have a hard time imagining that the people who are playing Leviathan and doing really well with it are going to go to Kraken and like suddenly become like dramatically better players. Like I think if you were winning with Tyranids, you were winning one way or another. And if you were one of the people who only played High Fleet Leviathan, now that that's not quite as strong, you're going to struggle. That's what I have to say about that. Dr. Anna, how would I make Wraithguard and Wraithblades competitive? I have played against Wraithguard, and I was pleasantly surprised at how tanky and effective they were. They're a little over the top, but for the most part, I think it's fine. A lot of people play them with a webway gate so that they can drop Wraithblades like directly into people's face. That kind of requires you to like be in a a format where fortifications don't get hosed, but I think that might be the way to go. Is you just like you need like a terrain format where you can webway stuff into the middle of the table, and then if you do that, you can be webwaying those guys and doing stuff pretty good. So yeah, I don't know if maybe that was my hot take for Tyranids there, chat. Yeah. Who knows? I don't know. I'm actually more excited to play with Tyranids now. It felt to me like, and maybe this was wrong, and maybe I was just mistaken, but it felt to me like the optimal play was to play Leviathan, but Leviathan wasn't fun to play, so I didn't even want to play Tyranids. And now that it feels like the game, like the faction is more wide open, then I can experiment more and like play more interesting lists. And I think that's fun. That's just cool. You know? Sadly, most Harlequin players are going to move to Twilight now, and Light will later get even further nerfed by points. I mean, every sub-faction is going to get nerfed by points. And to be fair, honestly, I think every sub-faction should get nerfed by points. The problem isn't just the sadists. The problem is the fact that you can bring nine Star Weavers full of Harlequin players and win every game. I think that's the only way to conclusively tone down the faction is to be hitting them, where they live. Hit them in their wallet for sure. Dark Eldar and Demons are maybe too high. Yeah, so I think I explained my I did explain my thought process at the beginning of the video, but for those who missed it at the start, I'll do it again. Essentially, what I did was I took the most recent win rates for every faction. I made a list based on that, and then adjusted things based on new trends and nerfs from the data slate. For the most part, the stuff that like looks too high is just because that's where their win rate is. So like, so based on the data that I was taking down, right, Drukhari were sitting at a 54% win rate, so in line with Adepta Sororitas. Demons were at 55, so higher than Drukhari. Obviously, Tyranids and Harlequins were somewhere around the same in low 60s, but I think Tyranids got a harder hit than Harlequins certainly did, so they dropped a little bit farther. And then Demons got a little bit of a bump because of how they interact with other factions. But generally speaking, I mostly just massaged the results based on their win rates going in, on how I thought that things would shake out. And I think that this is I'm pretty happy with how we're at. I'm happy with that. I like it. Chaos Space Marines too low for you? Yeah, I think Chaos Space Marines are interesting, right? Because they're clearly very strong, and it's just that not everyone plays different stuff in the Chaos Space Marine faction, and I think that the best lists haven't been decided on yet, especially since there's a lot of things are changing with the inclusion of demons and whether or not you have those in, and to be fair as well, there are a lot of people playing Chaos Space Marines that are not doing very well with them. So we see them winning a lot of events, but for the most part, that's because their player population is so high. So like, I would like to put Chaos Space Marines higher, but I, like, really can't in good conscience. You know, if that makes sense. Which is a little bit funky. If you take out Dark Eldar and Demons, Chaos Space Marines are a good spot. Yeah, if you just bump them 2 points up. I think maybe. And maybe it's like the best, you know, the upper echelon of the Chaos Space Marine player base is better than that of other factions, but you know, I don't know if we have the data for that right now. So yeah, that's what we have to talk about today. Chat. If you want to go back and hear my talks about other factions and stuff, I'll go through and timestamp this right after the stream is done, so you can go back and take a quick look-see back there. I'm not going to continue to go over every faction over and over again. But anyway, thanks everyone for coming and hanging out with me for this Tactical Tuesday. As I said at the beginning, big thanks everybody for 40k subscribers on the channel. That's freaking sick, and it's a fun meme number. As somebody in my Discord pointed out, though, that we're still 2,069 subscribers away from the true meme number of 42069. So that's the next goal, chat. But we're going to be doing a giveaway sometime this week. I have a ton of product to give away. I got some army sets. I got some kill team sets. It's going to be a good time. So we're going to be doing some raffles for those. Exactly what form that takes, I'm not 100% sure yet, but I will be posting a little update about that. Otherwise, yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out with me. I should be live on the Purple channel hopefully tomorrow. I think I'm just going to do some regular gameplay tomorrow, and then I have a game scheduled on Thursday, and it's going to be a good time. So I should be playing normal games the rest of the week. But I also got swamped with some other work last week. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to do some content this week, so expect some new videos coming out. I want to do a Dark Tide video, but I'm also kind of like daunted at talking about all my thoughts about that game, so that might happen. But otherwise, yeah. Thanks for everybody hanging out. Cheers to the folks who jumped on the membership and dropped super chats. I appreciate you people. And remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.